I have kept the door at Havelock Shore for 17 years. I have opened it to governors and to grief, to hard rain and harder news. I have opened it to men who came by invitation and men who came to beg, and I have watched the feared men, Mr. Aldrin course, though no one in this county speaks his name aloud without a certain care, receive them all with the same composed stillness, a stillness so complete it is its own kind of warning. In 17 years I have seen him raise his voice once. Once was enough for all of us. I tell you this so you understand what it meant when the storm brought something to his door that he did not know how to hold. It was the first week of December, and the gale off the water had been building since afternoon. By 9 in the evening the shore road was impassable, the old stone walls of Havelock were running with seawater, and the rest of the staff had retreated to the servants' hall with their tea and their low voices. I was at my post. I am always at my post. That is the single virtue the feared man has ever named aloud in my direction, and I have kept it like a commission. It was 20 minutes past 9 when I heard it, not the storm, but something underneath the storm. A sound smaller than the wind, and more insistent. I opened the door before I had decided to open it, and the lantern I carried swung out into the gale, and there on the top stone step, wrapped in a car blanket and a canvas bag tied at the neck, was a child. An infant. 3 or 4 weeks old by the size of it, no more. The note tucked inside the canvas bag said 3 words in a shaking hand, *, please. No one else, *. I will not tell you I was calm. I was not calm. I carried the child inside and I sent the junior footman for Mr. Corse and I sent the kitchen girl for Mrs. Pallant, the senior household nurse, a large, authoritative woman of 58 who had been engaged for the month to manage the old housekeeper's recovery and who had, in 3 weeks, arranged everything and everyone at Havelock Shore to her satisfaction. Mrs. Pallant arrived in the anteroom in 2 minutes with her bag already open. Mr. Corse arrived in 4, in his shirt and waistcoat, his jacket left behind, the only time in 17 years I had seen him come to a room unfinished, and he looked at the infant in my arms with an expression I could not read and have not stopped reading since. "Give it here," Mrs. Pallant said, not to me, but to the room in general. She was already writing in her small notebook. "I'll need the warming room off the east passage cleared tonight. And someone send to the village for Dr. Sefton first thing, the roads will be open by 6, the storm is already turning." Mr. Corse said nothing. He looked at the child. The child was crying, a thin, effortful cry, the kind that speaks of cold and too much trouble, and he looked at it as a man looks at a problem that has no clean solution and that he will not walk away from regardless. "See to it," he said, to Mrs. Pallant, to all of us, and went back upstairs. What Mr. Corse did not see, because he had already turned, was that a young woman had come to the entrance of the kitchen passage and stopped there in the lamplight, her hands folded in front of her apron, watching. She had been there, I realized, since before I opened the front door. She had heard the sound in the wind before the rest of us, or perhaps she had simply gone to look when the rest of the staff had chosen to stay warm, and she had followed the commotion to the edge of the anteroom and gone no further, because no one had told her she was wanted and she was not the kind of woman who assumed she was. Her name was Vera. She had been hired 3 weeks prior as undercook, and I am ashamed to tell you that I had not learned that name on my own. I had seen her in the kitchen passage every morning and every evening and I had registered her as one registers the furniture, present, necessary, unremarkable. She was a young woman of perhaps 30, thin and dark-eyed, with the kind of face that a room doesn't hold on to. I thought, in the moment I noticed her standing there, that I had never once seen anyone speak to her directly. Not Mrs. Pallant, who had reorganized the kitchen staff by the 3rd day and gave her instructions through the head cook. Not Mr. Corse, who had no occasion to pass through the kitchen passage. Not the junior footman, who was 22 and interested only in his own reflection. She stood in the lamplight and watched Mrs. Pallant settle the infant, and she said nothing, and after a moment she went back toward the kitchen. The infant cried for an hour. She had warming cloths and a feeding bottle prepared and the right knowledge, I do not doubt that, but the child would not be settled. It cried with the patience of something very small that has learned it must make its own case because no one is coming otherwise, and the sound of it moved through the stone corridors of Havelock Shore and reached every room and woke Mr. Corse, whose study light came on at 10:30 and stayed on. At 11, when I came through the kitchen passage to check the outer door against the wind, I found Vera there. She was sitting on the low stool by the passage radiator with the infant against her shoulder, and the infant was quiet. Not asleep, Its eyes were open and fixed on her face, but quiet. The crying done, the whole small body settled as if some private argument had been resolved. She had a cloth in her other hand, and she was patting the child's back with a slow, steady rhythm, and she was not looking up when I came in, and she did not look up when I stopped. "Mrs. Pallant is resting," she said, to the child, or to the wall. "She'll be back at 1. I said, "How did you?" "My sister had 2, she said. The second one was like this. You have to keep the head higher than people think, and you have to keep the rhythm even. Even. Not fast." She patted the child's back once to demonstrate. "And you have to stay." I did not know what to say to that. I said nothing. I went back to my post. She was still there at midnight. The infant slept against her shoulder, and she sat on the low stool with her back straight and her eyes open, steady as the radiator at her side. At midnight she came to find me. She came to the anteroom door and she stood in it and she said, quietly, "I need you to look at something." She had the infant settled in the warming blanket on the passage table, and beside it she had placed a small brown medicine vial from Mrs. Pallant's bag. The vial had a label, handwritten, in Mrs. Pallant's close script, that read the infant's weight and the prescribed dose, and beneath that the medication name. Vera pointed to the medication name without touching the vial. "That's not right," she said. "I am a night porter. I know doors and locks and the hour of the tide and the name of every man who has ever come to this house uninvited. I do not know medicines." "Tell me," I said. "The physician in the village prescribed a saline wash and a mild fever reducer," she said. "I was in the passage when Dr. Sefton telephoned this evening. I heard Mrs. Pallant take the call and write the instruction down. The dosage on that vial is 3 times what was ordered. And the medication isn't the one he named." She said it the way a woman says a thing she has checked twice and does not enjoy being right about. "Mrs. Pallant may have a reason," I said, "because I am a careful man." "She may," said Vera. "But I would rather you know, and be wrong about it, than not know." She looked at me directly. She had the steadiest eyes I have seen on a frightened person. "The child has a slight fever. If someone gives it that dose tonight, it will be very sick by morning." I took the vial. I went upstairs. I woke Dr. Sefton by telephone at 1 in the morning. He was not pleased. He became very still on the line when I read him the label, and then he said I should keep the vial and give the child nothing from Mrs. Pallant's bag until he arrived, and that he would be there at 6 regardless of the roads. I went to Mr. Corse's study. His light was still on. I will not tell you everything that passed between us in that room, because some things that happen at 1 in the morning in a man's study belong to him. I will tell you that I showed him the vial. I will tell you that he held it in his hands for a long time without speaking. I will tell you that when he finally spoke, what he asked was, "Who brought this to you?" "The new undercook," I said. "Vera. She's been in the kitchen passage since 11 o'clock with the child. It won't quiet for Mrs. Pallant. It quiets for her." He looked at the vial in his hands. He set it down on his desk very carefully, as if it were evidence, which it was. "Tell her to stay," he said. "Tell her I said so." Mrs. Pallant was informed of the situation at 2 in the morning and left Havelock Shore by 7, when the roads cleared. Dr. Sefton arrived at 6 as promised, confirmed the labeling error against his own written instruction, 3 times the ordered dose of the wrong compound, a substitution that traced, on examination of Mrs. Pallant's notebook, to a different infant she had managed 2 months prior, a dosing confusion she had quietly papered over rather than reported, and filed the appropriate notation with the nursing registry. The solicitors were contacted. The matter was handled, as Mr. Corse handles all matters, through proper channels and without spectacle. The infant was examined, found healthy, given the correct care, and slept until 9. I was at my post. I am always at my post. But I confess that at 7:30, when the storm had finally worn itself out and the first gray light was coming across the water and the shore road was passable again, I walked back through the kitchen passage to see how things stood. Vera was at the passage table with a cup of tea she had not touched, and the infant was in the warming blanket before her, and she was talking to it in a low voice the way you talk to someone who cannot understand the words but needs to hear that a reasonable person is present and intends to stay. She looked up when I came in, and there was nothing in her face that asked for anything. "Dr. Sefton says she's all right," I told her. I heard, she said. I said, Mr. Corse would like you to remain available this morning. She looked at me and then at the child. All right, she said. Mr. Corse came to the kitchen passage at 8 o'clock. He had never, in 17 years, come to the kitchen passage. I had been uncertain he knew where it was. He came in his full dress, jacket, the whole of it, the men completely assembled, and he stood in the doorway of the passage the way he stands in every doorway, with the room arranging itself around him, and he looked at Vera, who did not stand up, because her hands were occupied with the child, and who looked back at him with the same steady eyes she had turned on me at midnight. Your name, he said. Vera, she said. Vera Olin. He was quiet for a moment in the way that is not uncertainty but thought. You've been here 3 weeks, he said. Yes, sir. And you stayed the night. Someone had to, she said. Not defiantly. Simply. He looked at the child. The child looked back at him with the wondering, uncommitted attention of a very young infant, and then, I watched this happen, and I will not unsee it, turned its head and pressed its face against Vera's collar and closed its eyes. Mr. Corse stood very still. I am going to put the child in the family wing, he said. There is a room prepared. Vera said nothing. I would like you to come with it, he said. Not as undercook. As, he paused, and it was the only pause I had ever heard from him that had any uncertainty in it at all. I would like you to name her, he said. She should have a name before the morning is out. And I would like the person who names her to be the person who stayed. Vera looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at the child. Margaret, she said quietly. For the steady ones. The ones who don't get noticed. Aldrin Corse, the most feared men in this county, the men whose name people pronounce with care, stood in the kitchen passage of his own house at 8 in the morning after a sleepless night, and something moved across his face that I do not have the right word for. Not softening, exactly. Softening suggests something becoming less. This was something becoming more. Something that had always been there, compact and protected, opening like a room that has been shut a long time and remembers, with some surprise, that it was built to hold people. Margaret, he said. As if he were trying the weight of it. Then he held out his arms, and Vera placed the child in them, and he carried her down the corridor toward the family wing, and Vera followed, and I stood in the kitchen passage alone with the gray winter light coming through the small high window and the last of the storm moving off across the water. I have kept the door at Havelock Shore for 17 years. I know, now, what it means to watch a door open from the inside.